When you hear the word plague, you probably picture rats, boils, and a swift, feverish death. But what if I told you about a plague that didn't make you sick? A plague that forced you to dance. This is the true story of the summer of 1518 in the city of Strasbourg, when a mysterious affliction gripped its citizens. It started with one woman, but soon, hundreds were caught in its grip, dancing uncontrollably in the streets. This wasn't a joyful celebration. This was a horrifying, agonizing dance marathon that you couldn't stop. A dance that lasted for weeks under the blistering summer sun until people's bodies literally fell apart. A dance that killed. You're about to discover the bizarre and terrifying story of the dancing plague. A historical nightmare that authorities tried to cure in the most insane way imaginable. From the first frenzied steps to the ghastly carnival of death that followed, these are the facts that will make you question everything you know about mass hysteria and the limits of human endurance. Get ready to learn about the time a city didn't just catch a fever, it caught the beat. And it was deadly. Before we dive in, if you're fascinated by history's darkest and most chilling mysteries, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's get started. Part 1. The fever that gripped the city. To understand the nightmare that was about to unfold, you must first understand the city of Strasbourg in 1518. This was not a happy place. It was a city living on a knife's edge, a tinderbox of misery waiting for a spark. A brutal famine had ravaged the land, leaving the poor to starve in the streets. Disease was rampant. Syphilis, leprosy, and smallpox were common and terrifying realities. The people were desperate, malnourished, and steeped in a deep, spiritual dread. They saw the wrath of God and the hand of the devil in every misfortune. This was the world Frau Troffea stepped into when she walked out of her home in the middle of July and began to dance. There was no music, no joy. Her husband watched in horror as her body began to jerk and twist with a life of its own. Her arms flailed, her legs kicked, her face a mask of confusion and terror. She was not in control. He begged her to stop, pleaded with her to come inside, but she couldn't hear him. She was already gone, a prisoner in her own skin, her body now a puppet for some unseen master. For 6 straight days, the horrifying spectacle continued. She would dance until her legs gave out and she collapsed into a heap of exhausted flesh, only to rise again the next morning as the sun baked the cobblestones, her body once again seized by the relentless rhythm. Her leather shoes were worn through, her feet were bloodied and bruised, but still, she danced. Neighbors gathered to watch, their curiosity quickly turning to fear. Was it a curse? Had she been bewitched? Soon, the phenomenon began to spread, not like a disease passed through touch, but like a psychic contagion. A woman watching from her window suddenly felt her own limbs begin to twitch. A blacksmith dropped his hammer as his body started to convulse, joining the macabre dance. Within a week, over 30 people were caught in the same hypnotic, agonizing frenzy. They filled the narrow streets, a writhing, silent mass of humanity, their bodies moving without their consent. The city descended into panic. The normal sounds of life were replaced by the incessant shuffling scrape of feet on stone and the ragged, desperate gasps of the dancers. Something was terribly wrong, and as the numbers swelled past 100, the city's leaders knew they had to do something before their entire population danced itself into the grave. They turned to the only experts they had, the physicians. It was a decision that would turn a horrifying mystery into a state-sanctioned massacre. Part 2. The cure that became the killing floor. Faced with a crisis that defied all logic, the City Council of Strasbourg summoned the local physicians. These men, clad in robes and carrying the misplaced confidence of their era, examined the dancers. They noted their feverish state, their sweat-drenched bodies, and their ceaseless motion. After careful deliberation, they came to a diagnosis rooted in the bizarre medical theories of the 16th century. This was not a supernatural affliction, they declared, but a natural disease caused by hot blood in the brain. The cure, they argued, was simple and logical. The afflicted must be made to dance continuously until they sweat out the fever. They needed to dance the plague out of their systems. It was a fatal miscalculation. What followed was one of the most surreal and horrifying public health initiatives in human history. The city council didn't just recommend more dancing, they engineered it. They cleared out the city's two largest guild halls, creating vast, echoing dance floors for the damned. In the central grain market, carpenters were ordered to construct a large wooden stage, turning the plague into a public performance. But the most insane part of their plan was yet to come. They believed the dancers needed encouragement, so they hired professional musicians. Drummers, pipers, and fiddlers were paid to play upbeat, rhythmic music around the clock, providing a relentless soundtrack to the suffering. They even hired healthy dancers to join the afflicted on the stage, to model energetic dancing and keep the victims moving. They had, with the best of intentions, created the perfect conditions for a slaughter. Imagine the scene. Hundreds of people, their bodies already weakened by days of non-stop movement, are now driven by a constant, maddening beat. The musicians, likely terrified themselves, play on as the dancers' faces contort in agony. They weep, they scream for mercy, they plead with their eyes for it to stop, but their bodies obey the music. Under the blistering August sun, the cure began to claim its victims. The wooden stage became slick with sweat, and soon with blood from their torn and broken feet. The official chronicles of the time are chillingly clear. People began to die. They danced until they suffered massive heart attacks. They danced until their brains hemorrhaged from the strain. They danced until their bodies, pushed far beyond the limits of human endurance, simply gave out. Historical records state that at the height of the madness, as many as 15 people were dying every single day. The stage was not a place of healing. It had become a killing floor, and the city officials who had ordered the music could only watch in horror as their cure became a carnival of death. Part 3. The Saint, the Curse, and the Unanswered Question. After weeks of this grotesque, state-sponsored death march, the city council finally accepted the horrifying truth. Their cure was a catastrophe. The music was not healing the dancers. It was fueling their frenzy, pushing their exhausted bodies toward a fatal collapse. Panic turned to desperation. In a dramatic reversal, they tore down the stage. They issued a new decree, this time banning all public music and dancing. The musicians were sent home, and a terrifying, unnatural silence fell over a city that had been filled with a maddening rhythm for over a month. Having failed with a medical solution, they now fled to the only other explanation they had: the supernatural. The blame was now placed on a saint, Saint Vitus, who was believed to have the power to inflict curses of uncontrollable dancing upon sinners. The plague was officially reclassified as an act of divine punishment. A new, equally desperate plan was put into motion. The remaining dancers, many of them now emaciated, delirious, and on the verge of death, were rounded up. They were loaded onto wagons like cattle and began a grim pilgrimage to a remote shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, hidden in a mountain cave. There, in the damp darkness, priests performed exorcisms. The dancers were forced to put on red shoes, sprinkled with holy oil, and to circle a wooden carving of the saint while prayers were chanted to appease his anger. It was a last-ditch effort to beg a vengeful saint for forgiveness. Slowly, whether from the religious rituals or from sheer total exhaustion, the epidemic began to subside. The last of the dancers ceased their tormented movements. The plague was over. But the question that haunts us to this day is, what actually happened? Modern science has offered several theories. The most popular for a time was ergotism, a type of poisoning from a mold that grows on damp rye bread. Ergot can cause severe muscle spasms and hallucinations. In fact, the psychedelic drug LSD is derived from it. However, most experts now doubt this theory. The symptoms don't perfectly align, and it's unlikely that hundreds of people poisoned by ergot could perform such coordinated, strenuous dancing for weeks on end. The more likely explanation is a phenomenon known as mass psychogenic illness or mass hysteria. The people of Strasbourg were living under a level of psychological stress that is almost unimaginable to us today. They were starving, sick, and terrified of eternal damnation. The theory suggests that this collective trauma exploded into a bizarre, physical manifestation. They entered a kind of trance state, their bodies acting out the extreme anxiety of their minds. They didn't choose to dance, but their minds, broken by the weight of their world, forced them to. Even so, no theory perfectly explains how they endured it for so long. The dancing plague remains a chilling testament to the power of the human mind, and a dark reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that live inside of us.